Okay. Whenever you're ready. No, you should be, yeah.
All right, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the NFP Review Board for Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. Nolan, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Hollander,
Here.
Frederickson,
Here.
Rowe,
Here.
Stemple,
Here.
Bergia. Okay.
All right, what's, I apologize, do I need to read the excused board members or just the orange items?
No. Yep,
Can I-
just the orange.
Can I please get a motion to excuse absent members?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right. All right, so the first action item is a motion to approve the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Support?
Support.
Yes, support.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That is approved then. Next, we need approval of the meeting minutes. Are there any amendments or comments related to the draft minutes of the June 24th, 2025 NFP minutes? All right, I'm hearing none. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the June 24th, 2025 NFP meeting?
So moved.
Can you get a support?
Support.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that's moved, approved. Moving on to item D, public comments. If there are any public comments from the public, please come forward, state your name, and you have 3 minutes to address the board. Hey.
It's a little hard to hear. Okay, I'm here because I want to hear about the project preaching to Stockbridge. It was really hard to find this meeting. I attend the city meetings regularly, and so this is where I heard about, well, we heard that there was going to be a meeting about preaching to Stockbridge at the Edison neighborhood, and today, and so we had to call and figure out where the meeting was going to be, and it was not easy to find information about the Natural Features Protection Board. There hasn't been any agenda or meeting minutes since July 21st of 2023. We're not exactly clear if they're gonna if there's gonna be a discussion about 2022 topics, so I just say in this process there's somebody new, because I don't usually I'm not involved in other city meetings and stuff. It was really confusing to find information and to know exactly what's going on. So I just want to make you all aware about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how this one goes, but like I said, I thought that was okay. I thought the meeting was meant to get us. And I tried to thought that's what they said at the last city commission meeting. Not the last one, the one before, the first one. And I'm worried about the one at 322 Stockbridge. I'd like to get some information information about it. We looked online, we had no agenda up, and nothing explaining what your meeting is about, and nothing on the city's page. So, after the floodplain, which that's a floodplain area, what worries me that you're gonna build it up high, which means you're gonna put more people on it. Because you're gonna put a leak and stoppage and all that, not gonna talk about the flood, just put DHS property on it. I'm speaking because I don't know what's going on here. Are we at the right meeting? Are you talking about the DHS property?
Yes, thank you. I'll let
Yeah.
Nolan respond. Thank you.
I'd be happy to clarify. I think that meeting is probably at the Edison Neighborhood Association, and it's probably a public meeting. NFP doesn't have that on the agenda, and we always, NFP is always here in City Commission, fourth Tuesday of the month at 4. That's a good call out, though. I think I can get the minutes updated online on the city's website. We do have the minutes published, just not, I don't think the website page has been updated.
Do you know what time it started at the Edison Neighborhood?
I don't. I would contact them to see, but yeah, that project's not on our agenda this evening, so, yep. Oh, you're fine.
No, absolutely.
Good questions. Thank you.
Edison, and they said, oh, no, we don't have it. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Yep. Sorry about that.
All right. Do you have any call-in comments? Okay. All right, we can move on then. Hearing none, I can move on to item E, board member comments. Are there any general comments from the board? Okay, hearing none. No new business. Item F. Moving on to item G, unfinished business, NFP work session. Nolan, can you give background on the unfinished business item?
Yeah, so this is just going to be a short presentation. We're about halfway, well, we're over halfway now through 2025 somehow. Not sure how that happened. You just blinked my eyes and that happened. But basically, I just wanted to give the board members just a general update on some of the projects that have come through and just some of the discussion topics we've been, tried to coalesce some of the discussion topics that have popped up. And the plan is after the meeting to, start to formalize what we want to focus on as a board in review of the ordinance around some of those discussion topics. So once I get there, we can jump into that a bit more. So, yeah, and for anyone listening, the NFP board meets fourth Tuesday of each month, 4 p.m. here in City Commission chambers. We publish the agenda and minutes online with a program called Civic Clerk. We often also have meeting minutes on our city webpage, so if that's not up to date on the NFP page, we'll make sure it's up to date. And this type of presentation is new for the board, so we did an annual presentation in January. This is kind of a new thing too. It's just sort of a mid-year check-in. So let me get this out of the way. Go. Okay. So just taking a quick temperature check for 2025. So this year we've added 2 new board members, both of which are here. Yay, that's great. We've done something different this year. We haven't had any meeting cancellations. So generally when we've had agenda item or agendas with no action items, we've usually canceled those meetings because we haven't, in the past had any action item, right? So, but this year we've done it a little bit differently where we've held each meeting and actually held the space on unfinished business to bring up any discussion topics for the board and to look at these topics for implementation over the course of the year or next 2 years. And really, we'll get into some of that a couple slides here. And then we've had 4 approved projects so far that have gone through our site plan process, development process. There's been 3 administrative approvals, and I'll talk about each of those. And then we've had one NFP variance recommendation thus far. And I'll talk about some of those too. So diving in real quick. So the 4 approved projects thus far, one was 1609 Whites Road, which is the country club parcel. It's their original sort of country club property, not the old Lakeside Academy property, but their main property. 2045 East Michigan, so that's on the east side of town. That is a property the city owns. We saw it, they were doing some pump house upgrades there, as well as adding a new structure to treat PFAS. So that was a recent one. 669 Gull Road is Verberg Park. There's some improvements happening at Verberg Park on the north side of town. And then 1900 Belford Street, which is at Belford and Reed. That's a large site. This property was split off for a housing project, right? The larger property that it split off from is a city-owned or a brownfield-owned property. Shouldn't say city-owned, but a brownfield-owned property. And so those are the 4 projects that we've seen come through so far this year. I think the most complex one to date was probably the Country Club project, just given the scope and the scale of that one. Oh, this thing keeps popping up. There we go. Okay, then we had one variance recommendation that went from NFP to ZBA. That was for 433 Reed Avenue or Reed Court. It's basically a property right at the corner of Reed Avenue and Reed Court. It's a city, well, it's a brownfield-owned property that's going to get transferred to city ownership. And there's basically new stormwater infrastructure that's going in on site. So the reason this had to come back to the board for a variance recommendation was that there's language in the NFP ordinance about no new stormwater BMPs within setbacks of water resources. That includes wetlands and, streams, lakes, ponds. And usually we defer to the state of Michigan for their permitting for those types of features. But in this case, we actually had locally that no new stormwater BMPs within the setbacks, and what was being proposed was work to basically do shoreline work along the creek, do some felling of trees in those areas, and creating new passive and gray stormwater infrastructure facilities. So it was kind of all of the BMPs in one go, but due to the way the ordinance is written right now, it came before the board. Now the benefit is it'll come back again for full NFP board approval, so the board will actually see it again. And it also gives multiple opportunities for the public to stay engaged with it, so there'll be public notice for it. There was for the variance, and there'll be notice again when it comes forward. So, okay, and then a little more interesting. So the administrative approval. So for those new board members, NFP, again, is really tied to site plan review. And when it's a site plan review project, that project will come before the board for full approval. If it's a project that doesn't require site plan review or doesn't create a ground disturbance, it's basically classified as like internal structure work, then it's viable to use an administrative approval, which is where myself as the board liaison works to review that project and works with our planner who's running our site plan review to move that project along. And in the past, we didn't necessarily have an administrative approval letter. Now we have an administrative approval letter that outlines very clearly, if the scope of this project changes or there's ground disturbance or you're requiring, basically if the scope goes beyond what's been approved administratively, you may need to come before the NFP board for full board approval. So we keep that on file now so that we have it, the applicant has it for these projects. So 251 Mill Street, this is on the east side of town. This is actually the Mayor's Riverfront Park property, and that project was some internal upgrades to the interior of Growler Stadium. And so no natural features were actually going to be impacted. It was still a full site plan project, but because there's no ground disturbance and it's all technically interior work, it didn't require full NFP board approval. So it was basically structural work inside, adding a new sort of like store facility in there for their merchandise. 500 Golden Drive was a previous project, and they had received board approval in the past. It was actually one of the first NFP approved projects, and they had to make some minor changes to their landscaping, but they were within the bounds of NFP, didn't require site plan, and didn't really require permits. So it was a situation where it fell under administrative approval. And then 3419 South Burdick, we have cell tower projects that come through the city every once in a while. So there's cell towers throughout the city. Every once in a while, the equipment gets upgraded on the top of those cell towers. We treat those as basically interior work. It's isolated to within the fenced-in area of that cell tower, and it's all just taking the old equipment off the tower, adding the new equipment. And so those, I think at this point, may still require site plan review, but again, we get an application from them where they sign the NFP application stating there's no ground disturbance. Staff will review the application and their plans to ensure that, and then they'll, very similar, right? They'll get the administrative approval. So we've had 3 this year. And these are the projects that I'm tracking similar to what I reported on back in January. So at the end of the year, we'll have another full picture. We can add 2025 to, the past 6 years of projects to see how it's fluctuated over time. So that's kind of the overview of, what's happened this year. Towards the end of the year, I'll take a look and see if it's been an up year in terms of projects coming in or sort of, a normal year. Now that we're 6 years in with NFP, things started to ramp up a couple years ago. We had a larger influx of projects. This year, we had that sort of delay for the first quarter and early second quarter of the year where we didn't really have anything come in, and then all of a sudden, floodgates opened and there were projects ready to go. So that sometimes happens. Okay. And then the final slide, and this is where I wanted to just open the discussion with the board because I tried to capture some of the general concepts we've been discussing. We've talked about in the past the draft NFP guide and external resources. So linking to existing external resources to help a potential applicant or a developer navigate, where do I go for an arborist, a certified arborist? A lot of people would just Google that. That could maybe bring them somewhere they shouldn't be, right? Or cause an issue. So if there's an existing, association that we can link to, which there is, right? So we can link to that sort of external resources. We're just not allowed to say, oh yeah, go to Arborist Services at Kalamazoo. That's who we recommend. City can't make that recommendation, but we can point to the external resources. So I hope to have somebody here in August to talk about compliance with the board, because I know that was brought up earlier this year. And then in September, I'm hoping to have a staff person who can discuss stormwater and that standard as it relates to NFP, because when you have an NFP project, the stormwater standards are more stringent. And what does that look like? How stringent, or what type of regulation is that? Why is that? Then recently we've talked a bit about landscaping, particularly native species, and especially shrubs and grasses. And just thinking about if we want to add a table to the ordinance that lists some species that are good starting points, and then we can list other, we can provide links to external resources on those species to avoid, or, basically having that table so that, if it's a small developer or somebody who's not sure how to navigate all these species available, at least they know if they go with those species, they are in compliance with the NFP. And of course, they come forward with that list, right? And then the board, if the board's able to, can provide extra guidance on an individual case-by-case basis. And then stewardship activities and NFP Phase 3 have been on the back burner a little bit more, but NFP Phase 1 was back in 2019. It was like writing the ordinance, training a new board. It was real nitty-gritty ordinance stuff. NFP Phase 2 was like a year or two after that, and that was all the map updates that we made. And then NFP Phase 3 was supposed to focus on potential stewardship activities in the community. So that's always a discussion topic as well that comes up. And the NFP guide is sort of that, it's a part of Phase 3, just a little bit smaller piece. So I just wanted to open it up to the board too, to make sure I'm not missing any topics that, is there anything I haven't captured from this list?
I think to go along with landscaping, to talk about the overall tree list, I know that is, I think, under the tree committee's wheelhouse, but I don't know if we can weigh in on that or work with them on it, but I think there's changes I would like to see to it.
Okay. Yeah, I can reach out to our city forester and see. I know tree committee is for those public right-of-way trees and NFPs for private development, but when we were working with Davie Tree Service and we did our street tree inventory, I thought there was going to be some updates to our tree ordinance for the city to try and match better with NFP, so that there's some, there's not a different list here and a list for private development. There was, trying to tie them together a bit. So, yeah, that's certainly something that, maybe I can see if the forester is available to come speak and get a better understanding. And you're always welcome to, as a resident, you can also go to the tree committee meetings and, provide public comment that way. But
I just wanted to kind of jump on your comments about the landscaping topics. I know these are topics, and so we'll deep dive into them more, but I want to use caution when providing a list of plants for use. I know it is helpful, but I think often it's because it's provided and it's approved, it's what's selected first. And if we go down a path that everyone is using just the same 5, 10, 15 plants, we can also reverse the issue we're having and have a monoculture. That's an extreme example, but I tend to go on the side of having an extreme do not plant list and then having criteria and resources of where to get what we would like to have planted, and go into that native art conversation. And just going to throw that out there. And it's also hard to provide an exhaustive list of plant material. It's a big list.
Yeah, and we do have in the ordinance right now prohibited planting lists, and it's mostly, like Japanese knotweed, obviously some very obvious invasives we don't want. But the one thing we don't do is necessarily point to where people can look for like those external resources to actually go and find some of those species that might meet their requirements. I think we do mention mycin to avoid invasives, but other than that, I don't think we, so at the very least, like you said, I mean, if we're pointing to resources that can help people, figure out where to start.
Yeah, not to just jump one more thing on that, is it's, with every other site plan approval piece, we want everyone to feel, the community feel engaged, empowered to take care of the process as much as they can, but to also lean on educated resources and educated consultants when needed, and not to say you need a consultant for every piece of the puzzle, but for the bigger pieces and bigger projects, I think it is important for those projects to bring in a professional ecologist and whoever ever to talk to them about the nuances of like those plant material selections. So I don't know how we ride that line, but I think it's not doing justice to what we're trying to achieve with the native plant mixes if we just say, hey, here's a list, just say you're going to plant them in a big bunch and off we go. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to like compare that to other things we do in other parts of site plan. You got to verify what you're actually trying to achieve is going to work. So that's kind of off in left field, but just want to throw that out and make sure we're not accidentally saying, here's your list, you can run with it. I don't know if it's an asterisk being like due diligence required, or something like that. So I don't.
Yeah, I agree with that. Providing a list, I think, is definitely a slippery slope with projects that are trying to fulfill the requirements of the project, but maybe not necessarily fully invested in the diversity of species or thinking outside the box. And landscape. There's a lot of options out there, and I think probably best is just to referring them to the resources. I don't know if DNR has information about native plants versus non-natives, or certainly they probably have a list of invasives that are to be avoided. But I think providing any sort of list would be potentially problematic.
I think from a developer's perspective, the most important thing is to be able to figure out what the next step is. So like, I'm not an ecologist, and I'm never going to be able to, I could, but I never would sit down and try and figure out what the best plant mix is for my particular microclimate of my project site. But if I know early enough in the process that I need to hire someone onto my team to make that happen, to satisfy the intent of the overlay, and the city is providing me with a clear path to find that person as a non-expert, then that's where I can be successful. The issue, I think, for developers, especially people who fundamentally don't care very much about this and just want to be able to check a box so they can do their project, is having a clear path forward. So it's not as much about the requirements or even like the cost of a consultant, because if they're coming to us, we're talking about large projects that have architectural teams involved and things like that. So to have one additional consultant involved is not that big of a deal, as long as you're not going back and redoing it over and over. And that's something I've run into in our processes, because like on one hand, I understand if we're really trying to promote biodiversity, it's super complex. We don't want to put it in a box, but there's also this whole established framework for how development happens that we're trying to key that into, and that is a very stepwise, it's supposed to be a very stepwise, like rigid, list-filled approach. I don't really know how to reconcile those two things.
I think that was a really good way to state that. I wrote it down, the knowing early and providing a path. I think if we can keep that in the front of mind when we're going through all of these, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, and I didn't bring it for this meeting, but I can bring it. I have been, updating. Each time we've spoken at a meeting this year, I've added or taken out items from the draft guide, which I'm trying to, it's trying to form it as a step-by-step process of, start here, here's the link you need, or links, right? So like, for everyone here, you might have heard of GIS and what that is and what it can do, and people use it every day because they have, Google Maps on their phone, and that's GIS technically. So it's a tool that we have, but not many people know they can go use the city's GIS to do a lot of early exploration. There's water resources on there, there's flood imagery on there, there's aerial imagery that's it's better than Google imagery in terms of resolution. There's a lot that people can go check out first to get that kind of 30,000 foot view first, orient themselves, and then move on to the next step in the guide, right? So I'll bring copies for our next meeting in August, and we can have that be a discussion item, because I think I can understand the process versus, the process versus the substance of providing a list of species versus understanding where to start with some of this, because the ordinance it's not its job necessarily. It's a regulation, but just saying, find an ISA certified arborist. There's a glossary in our zoning code that tells you, it defines what some of these terms are, but for most people who look at that, the layman is just not gonna, an ISA certified arborist, you just said like 3 things I don't know, and that's fine, right? Because that's a specialized field. So, and also just people reading a zoning ordinance or a code is also in and of itself a skill that you have to develop. Like anybody can do it, but it takes a long time, being inside of a zoning code and like applying it to do it. And if you just have like a one-off project, you might dive into it a little bit, but so yeah, I can understand where having the process kind of nailed down helps a lot, so people don't feel like they're just floating out in the ocean. But I wanted to also just, bring up the landscaping piece, because that's something we've heard quite a bit, is that, the board has the benefit of being able to say, well, that's, okay, that list looks good. You've got a couple, non-native cultivars. They're not invasive. We're okay with them as a landscaping plant, that's low maintenance, right? So the board has the ability to discuss that, provide feedback to that applicant, and then also approve a list that isn't full natives. But just, wanting to recognize that trees are a little easier, right? They're top of mind. Their presence is larger, literally and figuratively. People understand trees a bit more, but like forbs and sedges and grasses and shrubs, like maybe people are savvy about shrubs, but you get further down that chain and I think it can be a lot.
There's a lot of options once you get to the shrubs and the grasses, and the list is long of things you could put in the ground.
Right, and there's a lot of them that sound the same.
Oh, yeah.
In
A lot of cultivars, variation.
Okay, well,
So it sounds like maybe just what we're talking about is providing some sort of like flow chart or checkbox for the user, especially in some of the, stormwater runoff or just wetland areas, and the plant specialists, like these are the,
right.
how can you use them?
So
Might need them for this, that, and the other reason.
yeah, so like a good example, like with stormwater, in the guide right now, it wasn't there before, but I've added an eagle chart that explains very simply what the different permit numbers are and what they're for. And then a regional, now this is where the guide would have to be updated, but that's easier to update than the ordinance. But like regional contacts, right? Hey, you're unsure about what eagle permit might affect your project? Well, your regional contact is here. You don't have to really like go do your own deep dive and go to Eagle's website and, figure that out. The chart is in the guide, and so we just need to make sure those contacts and things are up to date for people. But, oh, hey, it's Joe, he's our regional rep for Eagle for this area, Water Resources Division. Cool, I'm gonna just give him a quick call or email and ask a couple questions, and that staves off that sort of potential frustration.
Right.
Maybe with us at least, and maybe they can be.
Well, it's certainly frustrating to have to find out halfway through, oh, I need to backstep and do this, or find someone to help me with that.
Right.
But being able to provide that up front, probably very helpful for the.
Yeah, providing as much upfront as possible
Yeah.
to mitigate that.
Yeah, because what we don't think about very often is, so NFP is a stop on, it's a stop on the train, right? To getting to site plan approval and to getting to building permits for a project. And if we're not clear on the front end and people have to come back to us multiple times, it can have a cascading effect on projects where the delays can stretch into months because it's like the knee bone's connected to the leg bone, and there's unintended consequences every time we send somebody away to come back and give us something else. So the clearer we can set expectations on the front end, I think the better it is for the applicants, and also the better it is for us, because we just don't have to do the same thing over and over again. Or we're sitting in a really firm position where we're like, we told you what you needed to do and you didn't do it, and now you're back and it's not our fault,
And we've had one or two projects the past couple of years where, and it it varies, right? The quality of what projects come before the NFP and how well prepared certain applicants are. But we've had certain projects where, there was more upfront work in terms of getting connected with an applicant, them asking questions or clarifying questions, them diving into the code a bit and understanding some of the trade-offs for their project. And they come prepared, understanding what questions might be coming from the board. And so what that ends up doing, and this is what staff recommends, is like when you come prepared as the applicant, you have a better dialogue with the board overall. And it's also why, from my own end, I make my staff reports really thorough. I've got links in there to where the code sections are and things. Also thinking of residents who might not, you put a code reference and they don't know where the heck that is or what it is, but if it's linked, they can go and it goes right to it. They can read it and get a better understanding of like what the conversation's about. But it's sort of that two-way street, and we've had projects where they've come just thinking they just want to check that box, but it's more, they've got come more prepared. And if we can provide some resources up front too to help them come more prepared, that just been like, that just benefits the entire process for us, and it makes it easier to go through or navigate our development process. Because again, we're a part of site plan, so there's that sense that like, we've had people say, like, well, I just need to get through NFP. And it's like, I don't want it, it's not really meant for that. And like, what it is supposed to do is to have, a better end result for your project overall. It's not, I don't want people to view it necessarily as, I got to get through NFP, which it can be sometimes. Site, development process is hard, but yeah. So I will definitely plan on bringing printed copies of the updated draft, and I can show like how far it's come since it started, because it has changed quite a bit. There's been multiple versions now, and I'm happy to share that. So
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you kind of stated that people are coming at different levels of preparedness and don't seem to always fully understand what this step is and what they need to have with them. Even though I know you do list it, but yet we are seeing people come at different levels of preparedness. So it makes me wonder if we are missing something. I know we have an example at the end, but I wonder if like digital, like physical attachments people have brought in the past would be helpful for these or something like that. I find that is usually where I feel like we're lacking, is there's a lot of talking and not a lot of like visuals to help us understand what was actually happening. So that's just one suggestion, but I am hearing something that maybe would help us get a more common presentation from our.
okay, so like having if we had a standard, it might make it.
So, I hate to use that word, but or something that just helps them see what we're trying to get instead of there's something missing. If we think we have it all here and we're still seeing things come in that are not prepared fully and we think they have read it, then I think it's on us probably to try to meet those two ends of the puzzle kind of.
Yeah, there, like a newer section for the guide is, what's an example arborist report look like? That's in there right now. So like you're saying, having some of those examples for people to say, okay, so I kind of understand what it looks like and sounds like now, helps. Right. Yeah. What does a woodland assessment look like? And I do have a general section about like how to come prepared for a board meeting, and we've had people show up without presentations. The other hard part I know for the board and for myself is like, okay, the agenda packet is 150 pages. How can what's the most critical piece that I need to get into your hands physically as a board too, so that you can see, so that I'm fighting some of those limitations too, in terms of like some of these projects are so complex and intense that they have all that documentation. Because even like the MNFI report can be quite extensive in some cases. So that adds 30 pages, then the actual plan sheets are, there's 20 of those. Those are huge. But I do like I like your idea of not maybe standards, but having examples, visuals for people to see, just to get a better sense of what is it you're looking for. Oh, this is kind of an example of what you're looking for. It also makes them more well-equipped when they go, like, say they're looking for a woodland assessment. They're not necessarily fully blind then going into like a cold call with a company that can help them complete that, right? So they get a better, they have a little more empowerment on their end to like approach that company and say, this is what I'm looking for. Have you done something like this before? So it opens the door a little bit for dialogue instead of just like, cold call and just woodland assessment. Thanks, hang up. That's probably not how it goes, but.
That sometimes is how it goes. I've been on the receiving end of that and have a someone calling and asking for certain things, and we then had to read, the NFP to see, because they couldn't articulate what it was, because they're not arborists or, landscape professionals or anything, and so we're trying to figure out for them what they want or what they need for their project. One or two instances of that, but yeah.
For the public record, that might have been me.
I can't remember, but maybe.
I mean, that's the thing. That's the other thing with the NFP board, right? There's a lot of experts on the board. The fields are very complex, and that was since the beginning of NFP. That was always a case of like, how do we relay this complex information to the average person? And we've actually found through the years that we also need something to help certain developers too, just because there are certain development firms that, don't have a landscape architect, or they have to subcontract that work out. And it's just helpful, again, to have those resources available to say, this is what I'm looking for. Helps when they go out and try to get quotes for services. And it's lowering this kind of soft costs down through our development process, at least from the NFP perspective. And, I think that's what it was mentioned already, but, not having to come back multiple times, right? That already is a huge, you don't have to pay that fee again and again.
It's also a consideration during site selection. So if an NFP site is a really good site for a particular type of project, knowing that you're going to incur additional costs to meet NFP requirements, which you are, is critical on the front end if you're trying to compare that site to a different site. So all the way from the conception of a project, it's important.
Yep. And we've actually, we've had a couple inquiries on some properties this year that are just geometrically challenging as is, even prior to the NFP overlay existing. And, that's where there's been at least some experience on my end this year of people having some hesitancy with it, or not, definitely not having a full understanding of what it is and what it isn't. It's not, I have to keep reiterating, like, we don't, this isn't to stop your project at all. These were already tough to begin with, but we also, don't necessarily want sites like that to just be clear cut or just fully flattened out, regraded, because that can have ripple effects on, that's the whole point of NFP, right? Balancing, needs of the community and those features that also serve to protect parts of our community. So in this case, I'm speaking, slopes and woodlands, right, are the primary. Those are usually the two that coincide the most and are really important. So. Any other discussions, topics?
I do want to call out the experience that we had during this meeting of 2 members of the public not being able to find our agenda. And then I was also not able to find our agenda, trying to find it in the same place that they were looking before I stumbled across our agenda on the second website that hosts agendas and minutes for this meeting.
Yep.
That doesn't seem great.
Yeah, it's, I think what occurred was on the NFP website where you can find meeting minutes in the past, there's probably around when we transitioned to Civic Clerk. And Civic Clerk, for those listening, is what we use primarily to track our minutes, publish them, publish agendas, all that stuff. So I understand where the residents were coming from in terms of that is confusing, because we also don't highly publicize Civic Clerk all the time. So I can also work with or discuss with our communication staff and see, hey, NFP's fourth Tuesday of every month. Can we just schedule a social media post to help point people in the right direction? And that might help with the confusion. And then I can also work with them on updating the minutes that are on the city website. I think that's just all I need to do there is just get them the PDF with the correct minutes and have it published on the site. So, or just having the Civic Clerk link on the NFP page.
That's what I would do personally, but.
So there's always, yeah. So I think that's a good reminder, and that's something that could be accomplished before our next meeting, actually. So.
Yeah, because it is, they were correct. The last minutes that are, or the last agenda published on the actual NFP board portion of the city's website were from July of 2023.
Yep, and that is very closely, yeah, that probably one of those things when we transitioned into Civic Clerk, it just wasn't something that was thought of at the time for the transition, but we can rectify that, so. Any other items? Okay.
All right. So item H, staff reports and updates. No staff updates. Move right along on that. Communications and announcements, letter I. Are there any communications announcements from the board?
I have one, which is just to shout out the Canoe the Kazoo Paddle for the Planet 15 years after the oil spill event that's happening this Saturday. I might try to paddle.
Where is that taking place?
Tell me more.
Where? Historic Bridge Park, Waddles Road in Battle Creek, Michigan, at 9 a.m. Saturday, July 26th.
All right.
Okay, well, with that, we can adjourn. Do I need a gavel?
You can.